Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I am joining you right now in my comfiest of attire. I was literally just about to go to bed. This is what I look like whenever I go to bed. I have a little Starface pimple patch on because I could not go to town on a pimple I had on my face, and if I don't put one of these on, I am going to wake up with the equivalent of probably a scar because I will pick at it all night. So hi, how are you doing? It's currently 3 a.m. I'm just trying to make sure this doesn't fall off. But before I went to bed, I wanted to come on here and film one of these videos where I sit and talk because today, actually, I took a bunch of notes. I love a notebook. I'm going to be honest. I love, love, love a notebook. And this notebook that I bought was a really cheap one. Like, it was literally like 50p. From my local supermarket because I keep buying notebooks and then filling them up for like 3 pages and then I never use them again. So I decided that I was going to buy the cheapest one possible and maybe I would have some form of attachment to it because it really was cheap, and let's see if it works. But anyway, I've kind of been just writing things down as I go today. But I've had like one overall topic and one overall point, and it really kind of has to do with like other people's validation and kind of seeking approval and being on your own, being with people. And I'm kind of going to go through the things that I've written down and see where this takes me, and maybe you can identify or find things within that yourself. By the way, the pimple patch that I've got literally is the same pink as this, which is fierce. By the way, if I seem super laid back right now, it is because this is the point of the night whenever I go to bed. And the reason I wanted to film this right now is because this is kind of whenever I'm most talkative, which doesn't make sense, like whenever you're most tired. I can't really explain that. But like, I feel so delirious at this hour that all I want to do is talk. So you're going to be exposed to that today. So the first thing I've kind of written about was furthering on from the part one that I made of this, or like the first episode, I guess. I think I've done 3 of these. This is my 4th one. I have a playlist on my channel, and I've been thanking you all so much for the support. I honestly, this has been something that I've done on my channel, which has been one of my favorite things to film, and the fact that people are supporting it means the entire world to me. So thank you so much for that. But in the first one, I kind of talked about growing up, and I also talked about like my coming out story, which I didn't think I was going to talk about on there, but you never know what's going to hit you with these. And the first point that I have on here to kind of build the story I want to talk about is like growing up and like the school environment and like family and friends and like trying to figure out who you are at like an early age, right? And the reason I wrote this down was because it's going to have a point with what I talk about. So whenever I was growing up, I had like my childhood friends from school. And then whenever I went to my all boys Catholic school, I was kind of thrown in the deep end because I didn't really fit in with the other guys in my class. You know, they were very like laddie lad, football lads. All they wanted to do was like talk bad about women and talk bad about girls, and they were all dating like 50 girls at the same time, and they were all talking shit about them and stuff, and it just really wasn't my vibe. And also they were incredibly homophobic, and most of them were incredibly racist, and it just was the breeding ground for like the worst kind of people ever, which is so ironic, isn't it? Like Catholic school, all about love and Christ and stuff, and they're like the worst people you've ever met. But in school, I kind of find comfort in 2 guys, and we befriended each other, like I said in my first part. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I think that there's been times in my life where I've found friends and people just out of like pure survival or like circumstantial friends, and I think that they would agree that they were friends with me for the same reason, which was like if we didn't have each other, we wouldn't have survived school, and the only reason that we were friends was because we were put in the same class together. Like, if me and these 2 guys had met in the streets, like we wouldn't have became friends, but because we were in class and it was kind of the only people you could click with, we became friends. And I think that there's, definitely friends that you're friends with because of a certain reason. Like, whether my example of that is I would not have picked these people out of a crowd, or they would not have picked me out of the crowd if we were not forced to be in a classroom together. Because we didn't really share a lot of interests or anything. The only things we kind of related on was the fact that we felt different than the other people in our class. And, we ended up having a friendship for, a good couple years, I guess, from probably like 2016 until 2019. I was friends with these two guys, and then we all went our separate ways because obviously we were friends because we were in school rather than being friends out of school. And then I also kind of want to talk about like family. I don't know about anyone else, but I never really relied on family for friends. I mean, me and my brothers were always so different. We were close, but as children growing up, I kind of always felt a little bit different than my brothers, and I kind of had a little bit of resentment towards them for that because I was trying to figure out who I was. So I wasn't super, super, super close with my brothers whenever I was young. I know my parents would argue, no, we were all close. I mean, I would never go and just sit and talk with my brothers. I think the first time I ever sat down and fully talked to my brothers, like one-on-one, like we both wanted to have the conversation without our parents forcing it to happen, was whenever I was like 15 or 16 or something like that. We were just so different as children, and me and the middle child, me and not the oldest, but the middle child, we used to fight a lot whenever we were kids. Like there was like a joke in my parents that we were like Tom and Jerry, like Itch and Scratchy. Like we used to like have like physical fights, like me and my older brother. Yeah, both of them are my older brothers, but not the eldest. Me and the middle one, we would have physical fights all the time. And I think one thing that's interesting is I got a message from him. We're like great now. Like me and him are so close. Me and both of my brothers are really close now. And in adulthood, I'm way closer to my brothers than what I was as children. And we had a really good upbringing. So, we always got on. But me and the middle one, we always used to fight. And we have the best relationship now. I'll often go to Belfast and just hang out with him, or if I see him in London or something like that. And whenever we're both back home at the same stage, like we relate on so much now, and we butted heads so much because we were so close. And I got a message from him a while ago, and it was so out of the blue. It was at like 1 a.m. and it was like, hey, I just want to open up and be honest about it. And I clicked on it and I was like, what the fuck is this? And it was an apology. He apologized to me and he was like, I just want to, like, I don't know if you remember, but when we were this age in this year on this day, I did this to you, and I think about it often, and I really want to apologize for the way I treated you in that moment. And I couldn't believe that something like that weighed so heavily on him that I never thought about. It was like one of our like more intense extreme fights, and it was one of our only really physical fights, and he had sent me an apology for it. I mean, like over 10 years later, and I never thought about this event ever. And to know that was sitting on him was, blew my mind. And of course I accepted it and was like, I don't even think about this. And I'm sorry that was sitting so heavily on you because we were just brothers who were so close and we would fight. And again, we're so close now. But I never was like friend close with my brothers. Like I was close with my brothers in the sense of they're my brothers, but our interests were so different and everything was so different. So I was never like friends with my brothers. The way people with their siblings are like BFFs? I was never like that with my brothers. And I was never like that with my extended family. But I used to have a relationship with my cousins. I don't have one anymore. Family drama. I don't have a relationship with my cousins anymore because I don't like them as people. And the reason I don't like them as people is because I think that they have shown a very nasty side to me in years past. And they're not people that I want to associate with. And I think that is completely valid. And I think that that's completely fine. And I think that there is something to be said about not having to force a relationship just because you're family. And me and my cousins are a perfect example of that. I haven't spoken to my cousins in many, many, many years. I don't like my cousins as people. Like there are a couple of them that I like don't even respect. And that's just family, family things, right? And there's like members of my extended family I don't even respect. And then there's members of my extended family I absolutely adore and I do have a relationship with. Like, it's just like hit or miss, you know what I mean? Like, not everyone that you're related to has to be your BFF. And I hear people talk about, like, their relationship with, like, their cousins and stuff, and I'm like, wow, I cannot relate to that whatsoever. And I used to feel sad about it, but now I'm like, oh, well, thank God I'm not forcing a relationship with people that I really don't care about and don't care about me. But I know that that is something for someone where they rely so heavily on like family relationships and family dynamics when they're young. And for me, that wasn't the case. Like, I find that in friends my age rather than like my cousins. And by the way, I have like a couple cousins that I like still fuck with. Like, I absolutely adore them. And a couple of them live in London now, and I absolutely love them. I'm talking about like ones that were similar to my age, not ones that are like in their 20s or 30s now. Um, so I never really found that in my family whenever I grew up. I was really close to my parents, but that, and my brothers obviously, but that was pretty much it. And I think as well, my friend group from the time that I was like, especially like 14 to 19 was so formative to me. But the problem with that was it was friends that I was friends with because I had like met them in school and then met their friends that they were friends with in school. So it wasn't a diverse group at all. It was a very close-minded group, and we were only friends with each other because we depended on each other, and we didn't want, like, it was comfortable. You know what I mean? So my like formative group, I really, really, really got close with them, and I relied on all of their opinions. I really loved all of them. I would have died for all of them. But the problem with the group was that it was set up in a way where it was like a bunch of friends who were friends with each other circumstantially because of school or because of work or because of not people that we've genuinely sourced out in life that we absolutely adore. And that's fine. And then all of them put into one group. It was going to be a disaster to fail. And it ended up doing that. And in 2019, a very explosive fight happened in the friend group, where just all the personalities started clashing and people started turning on each other, and it was awful. And it's still something that I think about to this day, and I often see some of these people when I go back to Derry, and it's so awkward. But when that friendship lost, that to me was like my consistent friend group and consistent people that I would rely on that weren't my family. So whenever I lost all them and they lost me, and it was, vice versa, and we all had to go our separate ways, it was crazy because that happened at the time whenever I left college. So the two guys that I was friends with, circumstantially, and they would say, and by the way, one of the guys has literally said to me as well that he agrees with this. This isn't me being shady or anything. They obviously went their own ways. I went my own ways. We weren't in that school anymore. The friend group were over, and I was really on my own. And it was during the time when we were about to go into the pandemic, and it was obviously centered around being lonely anyway, and everyone locked in. And it was a crazy time of, I spent so many years looking for validation in friend groups that I had, and because sometimes the friend groups would be quite big, or friends that I had, whether they were circumstantial because we went to school together and we didn't really relate on anything but we were in the same class, or not. Like, I always was with people. I always did things with people. I always experienced life with people. And if I had an opinion, I would share it with the friend group and get their opinion. Then their opinion became mine, and vice versa. So whenever all that was stripped back and then we entered the pandemic, I really struggled to figure out who I was because I relied so heavily on not only being with people, but other people's opinions. And I think whenever I moved to Brighton in 2021, which was a year after that, I had no one as well, because I had came from the entire friend group imploded on itself. We just came out of the pandemic. We were still in the pandemic, but we came out of one of our lockdowns. I moved to Brighton. I had nothing to lose because I didn't have my big friend group in Derry anymore, but I still had a lot of friends in Derry, but they were all very separate. So in moving to Brighton for a new life wasn't that much of a loss in terms of friend groups and stuff, because I had the same friend group that I had in Brighton that I did in Derry, which was no one, but I knew some people here and there. And in Brighton, I knew some people. Actually, no, I didn't. Just whenever I think back on this, I knew no one when I moved to Brighton. And the first person that I met in Brighton was someone that had reached out to me through a friend of a friend and said that they had seen my videos about moving and they would love to go to a bar or something like that. And if I didn't have that first girl, Molly, if I did not have Molly, I don't know how I would have survived in Brighton, because then she introduced me to a world of feeling comfortable going out in Brighton. And then I was introduced to one of her friends, who then introduced me to her friend, then her friend, then her boyfriend's friend, and I'm in that friend group to this day, and I, really close with them. But for a couple months, whenever I moved to Brighton, I had no one. And it was crazy because I went from years and years and years of needing people's validation and needing to do things in life with people to feel validated to moving to a new city all by myself and literally having no friends, having no family. And it was a sense of alone and not knowing what to do with myself. And so I kind of turned to social media in a way to kind of show what I was doing. So I kind of felt like I was still experiencing life with people because I feel that I have this weird in between where I love being on my own, but whenever I'm on my own, I don't feel like anything I'm doing matters because I'm not showing anyone or no one's experiencing it with me. And I think it stems from loving company. And I always loved company growing up. I loved going to a cafe with someone. I loved going to a restaurant with someone. So then I kind of turned to, okay, well, I'm doing all these activities alone now. If I share them on social media, then I'm kind of doing it with someone or FaceTiming my mom or something like that, right? And I just heavily relied on other people being there for me to value a situation. Like I had no sense of identity to do with myself at all. Absolutely no sense of identity in every single sense of the word. And I think that, you know, I went from spending every day with people to like for years to moving to Brighton and spending months not knowing anyone and, you know, living a very secluded life with just me, Tyler, my kitty at the time, and Bonnie. That was it. And I mean, I lived in an apartment by myself and it was very, very, very lonely. And I think I underestimated how hard it would be to meet people in a city you're not aware of, you've never been to before. I'd never been to Brighton before I moved here, which is kind of a gamble. But furthermore, the fact that we were still, you know, going in and out of the pandemic lockdowns, so no one was going out. So I was, you know, trying to meet people in a sense where we were still going in and out of a lockdown. We were out of a lockdown whenever I moved, and we were out of one kind of permanently then. But the sense of people not wanting to go out because we just came out of one was there. So people weren't even going out and unis were all closed. So people my age were all back home. So there's no one really my age in Brighton even going out. So that kind of added a whole new level of it. And I really did turn to not knowing how to live my life because no one else was involved in it. And I kind of lost all senses of myself. But it was the greatest thing because I had to gain every sense of myself because I had to spend a couple months doing everything by myself, experiencing life by myself, not having anyone beside me doing the activities with me, which then kind of led me to have to find validation in myself and not rely on someone else being there with me for it to be a key moment of my life or a key memory. And I think something that really, really, really triggered this was when I first started solo traveling. I think traveling is the greatest thing that you can do. I think the greatest thing for yourself if you solo travel or if you go with people, I think both are incredibly beneficial. I started solo traveling, and it's something I do to this day pretty often. I solo traveled for the first time in September of 2021. I went to Paris by myself, and April, June, July, August, September. 5 months I had basically spent ish by myself. And then I, you know, obviously I'd met people here and then within that, but I mean like genuinely like living it. It was lonely. 5 months and then I decided to solo travel. Because I was like, I'm pretty much so lonely here. I may as well be lonely somewhere else in the world. And it was a pretty hard time, you know, moving out. And I was living with, oh, well, I don't want to move back home because I want to prove everyone that I can do this. So there's a bit of like an ego in there of me not wanting to come across like I couldn't do it because I had my dad in my ear being like, you know, you're not going to last and you're going to come home. And I remember there was one dinner where he said that, where he was like, I give it 3 months and you'll move back home. And I remember that always stuck with me. And even in my darkest day in Brighton on my own, I was like, I can't prove him right. Because I spoke so much about how I wanted to move out, how I was going to do it. I was like, I'm not going to let that motherfucker win. And I didn't. 3 years later, suck on it, Dad. So whenever I solo traveled, I learned even more about myself. Because when I would travel or spend time with so many people, um, you know, with people, sorry. So whenever I would travel with people or I would just spend time with people, um, it was nice to have people's conversations, and it was never a dull moment. You know what I mean? You never needed to look for entertainment. You also never needed to make a moment more exciting. Like if you're with the fun people, like doing the most boring activity can be fun, but when you're by yourself, it's more of like a mundane, boring task. So it's harder to like almost create, in my mind, key moments when you're on your own, and traveling is, not anything different than that. But whenever I solo traveled, I find everything out against myself because I was forced into social situations. You know what I mean? In Brighton, whenever I moved, it was very easy for me to just dwindle in my apartment all day and feel sorry for myself. But if I was in Paris, or even when I solo traveled to LA, which is so crazy for me to imagine, like at 18 years old, I traveled across the globe. Like, holy fuck, that terrifies me. Like, why did I do that? I loved it. Best experience of my life to this day, but wow, that was scary. And I wasn't even scared in the moment. Like, I would be more scared traveling now, which is weird. I think I was just so ballsy and had life by the fucking balls. But whenever you're traveling, if you're going out to a restaurant, you have to talk to the waiters. You have to make an effort. You have to, if you're in a supermarket, you have to talk to people. You have to, in a new place as well, it's all very exciting. So you're doing social activities and it's very exciting. And I think that traveling really just opened my eyes up to the world, how many people there were. I think you learn so much about yourself whenever you're traveling, specifically solo traveling, but even just traveling with other people. And by the way, if you travel with people, you might realize at the end of the trip that you fucking hate those people, because traveling is one of the most stressful things you can do when you're with people, and you can really start to turn on people. But when you're solo traveling, you can only turn on yourself. It really was. I ended up finding so much comfort within myself when I solo traveled. I ended up loving going to dinners by myself, going to a restaurant by myself. I ended up preferring going to a restaurant by myself because I got to sit with my own, thoughts and think about the day and think about tomorrow and think about things that have happened to me in the past and, soak in what was around me, whether it was just listening to my music or taking my earphones out and listening to conversations around me and taking in the atmosphere of the city I'm in. I ended up fully loving spending time by myself, and I find so much about myself. So whenever I then went back to Brighton after my first solo trip, I started implementing that in my life and I got more confident. Then I went on more trips, I learned more, different cities, came back, more applied it to my life. And I think that what was so crazy is that after I kind of turned into this very, I don't want to say antisocial person, but I definitely for a lot of 2021 and 2022 preferred being by myself. I went from needing everyone's validation to not wanting validation and just being by myself. I turned into a very, very, very isolated person. And I would end up going from years prior needing social interaction to then feeling exhausted after even just hanging out with one person. It was such a, I was going to say a quick turnaround, but no, it was very gradual over a long period of time. And it very much so was apparent. My entire personality changed. My entire likes and dislikes changed. And I really started to figure out who I was rather than being in a friend group and almost mirroring other people's personalities, which I think at a certain stage I was doing in friend groups where I felt intimidated by people who were higher up in the friend group than me. So whenever I stripped all that back and put myself in an uncomfortable position like solo traveling, which can be quite daunting, I really started to discover who I was. And I think that that is something that I can, if you're able to, solo traveling, I think is the greatest thing that you can do for yourself. Greatest thing. To learn who you are. And a lot of my friends that I'm like really close with now have started solo traveling, and seeing them experience that, and every time I see them after their trip, how different they seem, I just think it's so great. I really, really, really do. And you always see people be like, the best thing I wish I did, or sorry, the best thing I did in my 20s and something I wish I did more was solo traveling. And I'm only 20 now, but Jesus, it's the greatest gift. And so when I moved out, obviously I traveled a lot and I was forced to be alone. I'm just reading through a note I wrote here. I was forced to be alone and, find interactions with strangers, even when traveling. You were having to talk with so many people, and But also in solo traveling as well, like I wasn't completely alone, and I would still kind of find comfort in other people that were familiar to me, whether it was, I mean, whenever I solo travel, I mean, I was FaceTiming my mom, like, if not every single day. And even posting on social media felt like a way of including people. But in-person interactions are always way more impactful, at least in my opinion, rather than a FaceTime call. I think that's a pretty average thing to say. And I think one thing I started to pick up on as well was I was spending so much time in restaurants and bars and even in Brighton, or if I went to London or I went back to Derry and I was by myself or something like that, being in a restaurant and a bar and looking around and seeing a couple on a date or a family or a friend group. I started to analyze these people whenever I was in friend groups, and two things I took from it. Number one, there was a time whenever I was in New York and I was in a restaurant, and it was actually on my birthday last year, and I was doing my daily analyzing of people watching, which I absolutely adore, and I saw this friend group, and at first, I'll put both points in. Normally when I look at these people, I get a little bit sad, and I'm like, oh, I'm so far away from everyone I know, I'm all by myself, I feel very lonely. But this one time on my birthday, I kind of felt this way. I was like, I'm here on my birthday. It had just turned my birthday. It was the 29th of September at midnight, so it wasn't like I was spending my birthday alone. I actually spent my birthday with my friends the next day. But I remember thinking, oh my God, like, I really wish I was with people right now. It's going to be 10 minutes until my birthday. And I started watching this friend group. They were a couple tables down from me, so I couldn't hear anything, obviously. I was just watching it. And I was very much so picking up on the fact that there was two leaders of the friend group and that there were three people. There was like 10 people in this table. Three people who were very excluded from the conversation. And it kind of just brought me back to, like, reality that I'm by myself. I'm the most reliable person that I know to myself, and how much in moving out and traveling and all these different experiences that I've been so lucky to do, I've been able to discover who I am stripped back without needing other people's validation. And I relied on that so heavily at a certain stage, and I will never make myself feel like I'm not listened to, or I will never make myself feel excluded from a conversation like I have in friend groups, even when I've relied so heavily on people's validations. And the more excluded I felt from conversations, the more I wanted to be validated, the more, I tried sucking up to people. And I think when I moved out, I struggled with, my friends and family not being involved in my new situation with, this new life. And it just kind of turned from that of feeling lonely and like no one is experiencing this with me to, no, they'll know, I'll let them know, but this is about me right now. And that is a selfish thing to say, but I think it was important to. And I think in your formative years, it's important to be selfish and it's important to look after yourself. And I think discovering who I was something that happened to me within the last 2 years. And every day I'm continuing to discover more and more and more, but that was something that was so important for me to get out of the mentality of just needing people's validation or needing people's approval. And I just think that there's more to life than... Ooh, there's something on my mic. There's more to life than wanting the person who's the higher up in the friend group to like you. What's more important to me now is that I like me. And it really took all those different experiences and taking things from even bad experiences to know that, I will be reliable in my life because I want to be. And that's not going to be something that comes and goes. And also, I would much rather be alone than be in a situation where not only I'm trying to seek validation from people who maybe aren't the greatest, but I would rather be alone than be with people who aren't the best. And I don't necessarily know what point I was making here, but it kind of was about how I find myself in a way. And like these last couple formative years, and I mean, this one has been a formative year as well. And I think I'm at that stage and I'm learning, and I would love to know people's opinions, people's perceptions of themselves. I think my overall point here is that I spent so many years of my life seeking validation from people that I completely hid my own personality. And it was really only whenever I was forced to be by myself that I found out who I was. And obviously just trying to work on that every day. I would love to know people's opinions on this. So let me know down below, and I will see y'all very soon. And I'm going to head off to bed. What time is it right now? It is currently 3. 32. I wish I picked this up at 3:33 because that would have been a beautiful number. But anyway, I hope you're all doing very well. Thank you for being here. I have a playlist on my channel of 3 other ones of these. If you have any topics or any things you want to open up about down below that maybe you want me to talk about, let me know and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.